Hello, my name is Bill Malone, and welcome to this professional development workshop for Liberty University Online. The title of this presentation is Establishing a Culturally Responsive Classroom to Confront the Student Achievement Gap. I hope that this presentation is both helpful and informative. This workshop, as well as this presentation, has been specifically designed for middle and high school teachers that are interested in creating a classroom environment that will produce a long-lasting impact on the lives and futures of their minority and underrepresented students. Teachers today are confronted with a wider variety and greater diversity within their classroom. This presentation is designed to assist them in creating a classroom environment that will aid their students and help them achieve a greater success. Today's workshop presentation will be approximately 30 minutes, and it will be comprised of 3 sections. Each section will be approximately 10 minutes long. The purpose and objective of this workshop in each section will be, section 1, will be to sound the alarm, to provide middle school and high school teachers a baseline understanding of what an academic achievement gap is, and to remind those teachers of the importance and the impact they have on not just their academic lives while they're in school or in class, but the impact that they have on the lives and futures of their students. The second module will be to discuss the actual research associated with the culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive curricula and the impact that it may have on those students. Unfortunately, not enough teachers are fully aware of what culturally responsive teaching is and how it can aid in improving on the number of students that succeed in their classroom and ultimately succeed in life. The third module will provide strategies and best practices for teachers to directly employ in their classroom that should assist in developing a culturally sensitive environment that will in the end benefit their students and provide those underrepresented and minority students the best opportunities to succeed, again, not just in their classroom, but also in life. Today's teachers are confronted with a completely different classroom than teachers in the past. Teachers are confronted with greater diversity, both ethnically, racially, linguistically, even confronted with situations of disability. The question that we must ask ourselves now is, what is an academic achievement gap? And why exactly should we care? Why exactly should it matter to me as an educator if one student or a group of students are doing well or poorly? This section is going to address that question directly. What is the academic achievement gap, and why exactly should I care? First off, we need to define what an academic achievement gap is. How does it occur? Well, let's start with an academic achievement gap exists when a group of students significantly outperforms another student group on average in educational achievement. Now, let's be clear. This goes beyond the idea of one student simply being smarter. The idea of an academic achievement gap actually addresses the concept of an entire group of people outperforming an entirely other group of people. For example, your African American students in comparison to your white students, or your women versus your men. It's important to recognize that when we're discussing an academic achievement gap, we're discussing it in terms of entire groups versus just simply smarter students. Academic achievement gaps have, of course, been found, as I had stated earlier, in males versus females, different socioeconomic groups, racial categories, or even parental educational attainment levels. The important thing to consider is when you're looking at an academic achievement gap, your mind has to shift from, is this student simply smarter, or is this student simply slower? You have to keep in mind as educators that it is possible for an entire group to be disenfranchised academically or to be held back academically. So while we're looking at this, keep it strongly in your mind that these groups are not just racial, not just socioeconomical, not just parental achievement, but could be any or all. But again, groups versus groups. First thing we need to consider is the recognition of structural inequalities in society. And this goes along racial, gender, socioeconomic, any identity lines open the discussion of the flaws or the challenges in the educational system. Each of these flaws doesn't just create an academic achievement gap or that phrase, but an opportunity gap. There is actually an opportunity gap. Research has found that African Americans and Latinos, um, and low income students have fewer opportunities to take math, to have math classes, to have access to quality teachers like you and me. Therefore, those students start off behind. They start behind the curve of their white students or students from higher economic environments. It's important for us to recognize that these gaps are not just based on the intellect of the students, but in many cases, if not most cases, due to a lack of opportunity for these students to have access to teachers that care, or even have any interest in the long-term advancement or success of those students. Workshops like these are designed to change that awareness of what's happening. Here is a great quote from Sharonda Allen. The sheer presence of an academic achievement gap based on race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status implies an unequal education system. But the long-term implications are far more consequential than only an unfair system of education. Rather, the effects have profound consequences for life outcomes ranging from employment to welfare dependency, even to health. That quote reminds us, implies to us, that our effort to educate our students, when there is a gap, we're not just hurting them academically, we're hurting them throughout life. The idea that there is an academic, the idea that it exists, the idea that there is an academic achievement gap at all implies that there is an unfair system for our students, and that some students have greater access, some students have less access, and some students will slip through the cracks. And like this quote states and implies so succinctly, it has profound consequences for life, ranging from what jobs they'll end up with, if they're going to be on welfare, even down to their health. The academic achievement gap has deep implications that we as educators should not ignore. Here are some important points to consider when we discuss an academic achievement gap. First, let's address the idea that there is a black-white gap, and that there are major significant social issues that cause that gap. The roots and history of the American school system are rooted in segregation. There's differential in pay. There's differential in tax base that pays for books. There are various and other forms of historical discrimination that has in itself generated an unequal opportunity for education. So historically, it is not uncommon or not an arguable point that African American men are less likely to attend college or succeed in college than their white counterparts. That is a measurable fact. And that's something that we should consider. And as educators, we should fight to change it. Only 5% of students aged 13 and above have math scores in the top quartile of the white math students. Again, these are points that are well known. And again, it's an achievement gap that we as educators should be fighting desperately to change. Same with male and female. Generally, male-female achievement gaps tend to favor boys in mathematics and girls in reading. It's obvious to see that that can affect career choices. How it would determine if a little girl would become an engineer or a little boy would become a writer or a journalist. These achievement gaps are measurable, recognizable, and in the end, changeable, fixable. One of the points that we have to consider in attacking this achievement gap is one, history. The history of the public school system must be examined in effort to make changes in these systems. If we deny the changes in history, or we deny that there's history in play, then we miss opportunities to change things. We should also consider, which is what this workshop is about, strongly recommending that teachers begin to utilize culturally responsive curricula and instructional practices. Take into account the students' cultural differences. And of course, thoroughly examine your school's culture and your school's climate. If you want to change or make some difference in the academic achievement gap, you have to pay attention to what's happening inside of your schools, inside of your classroom, and the culture and climate that actually exist. Okay, we come back to the question, why should we care? Why should I care at all about the academic achievement gap? Why does this make a difference to me as an educator at all? Well, the answer is actually simple. Because without your direct intervention, your students' chances of advancement to college or actual success in life are greatly diminished. If you don't care, who will care? If you don't wake up and decide to make a difference, who's going to wake up and decide to make a difference? The academic achievement gap is beyond the students' control and ability to fix for themselves. They need us as educators to recognize that there is a problem and do whatever we have to do to fix it, to mitigate it, and to give our students an opportunity to succeed not only in our classrooms, but to succeed in life. As I just stated, it is our responsibility as educators to do whatever we have to do to make a difference in the lives of our students. The first recommendation to be made is to use a culturally responsive curriculum or a culturally responsive or to create a culturally responsive teaching environment to make a difference in the lives of our students. We ask ourselves immediately, what is a culturally responsive curriculum? What is a culturally responsive teaching environment? And honestly, why should I use one? For teachers who are new to this or teachers who are learning right now, why should they use a culturally responsive curriculum and teaching environment? Those are important questions to ask. And if we care at all, we all want to know. Now, let's define culturally responsive teaching. Culturally responsive teaching can easily be defined as using the accumulated knowledge of various cultures, past experiences, acquired frames of reference, and even the performance styles from ethnically diverse students in a way that enhances their learning experience. In other words, we are taking a student's actual life, their history, their past, their language, where they live, what they do in the evenings. This is something for each of us to keep in mind. Are your students coming from single family households? Do they have computers in their homes? Are their parents educated or not? When we are defining this term and thinking about culturally responsive teaching, it means that we are taking their story and incorporating their story into our educational effort, and not just reading the book to them and expecting them to master it. Keep in mind, every student has a story and a backstory and a life story, and it's on us as educators to use their story to help them succeed and gain a better education. Again, a culturally responsive curriculum is a curriculum designed to allow teachers to include the cultural framework of their students. That's according to Geneva Gay 2020. Research has found that culturally responsive classrooms motivate their students to learn. And what teacher doesn't want to have a student that's actively motivated to learn? And using this culturally responsive curriculum motivates their students to learn. It makes them want to participate. The essentials of this motivational framework are that it allows teachers, now get this allows us to respect diversity. It allows us to take into mind, yes, they're different and their differences matter. It allows us to engage the motivation of a wide range of students. It allows us to take in what excites them, to use what already excites them to help them succeed in school and in life. It allows us to create a safe, inclusive, respectful learning environment where the students feel like they belong there, where they feel like they're comfortable, their views are respected, their language is respected, their culture is expected, and of course they'll open up and have a greater desire to learn. And of course, this system is derives teaching practices from across various disciplines and cultures and promotes equality and equitable learning. This system of culturally responsive teaching is not just a one-size-fits-all program, but it's designed to give every student in your classroom an opportunity to succeed because you're paying attention to every student in your classroom's life. Now we can look at the significance of culturally responsive teaching and account that the major significance is of the use of this type of curriculum is the dramatic impact it has on minority and underrepresented students. Now I'm going to say this is dramatic. It touches them immediately where they are. According to the University of Connecticut, the influence of having a black teacher can have a monumental difference in a black student's life, and the effects begin early in education. Having just one black teacher in elementary school not only makes children more likely to graduate high school, it makes a significantly even more impact of them enrolling in college. Now, this is what's dramatic. Black students who've had just one teacher, just one black teacher by the third grade are 13% more likely to enroll in college. And if they've had two, then they're 32% more likely. What makes this so important is if their culture is taken into account, if they can see themselves in the educational process, if they don't feel left out of educational opportunity, they're more likely not just to do well, but to advance in the future. Now, I want to stress this again. When we look back at the question as to why we're doing this or why we'd want to do this, well, the dramatic impact that we can have by simply acknowledging the culture of these students will not just affect them today, but will affect them tomorrow and will affect their future academic lifestyle, academic life, and again, have a dramatic impact. Research clearly shows that the use of culturally responsive curriculum has a dramatic impact on these students. It's also important to note that not only does it impact them academically, success-wise, future-wise, but research suggests that they're happier. Research suggests that your students will enjoy school more. It appears clear that using this type of curriculum not just closes the gap, but gives students an even greater incentive to want to participate in the academic process, to want to be there. Why? Because they're enjoying seeing themselves as a part of the academic effort. Being a part of the academic process, they can see themselves in the education, not just words on the page or words that come out of the teacher's mouth. I think it's important that we revisit the actual definition again of culturally responsive teaching. According to the author Geneva Gay, 2002, culturally responsive teaching responsive teaching uses the cultural characteristics, experiences, and perceptions of ethnically diverse students as a conduit for teaching them more effectively. In other words, again, you are using their life to teach them better. Culturally responsive teaching is about designing dynamic environments and utilizing your classroom practices to allow your students to succeed. You are taking their life and using their life as an opportunity to teach them better, help them succeed, help them enjoy the learning process even more. Here is your opportunity to not just teach them well, give them an education. You're taking an opportunity to teach them to enjoy learning. And if you want to close the academic achievement gap, I would suspect you'd want to start with teaching your students or giving your students an opportunity to not just learn, but enjoy learning. Again, we're back to the question of why. Why is culturally responsive teaching? Why should I want culturally responsive teaching in my classroom? Why should I have an interest in uh, developing a culturally responsive curriculum in my classroom? Well, the answer is exactly the same as even knowing what the achievement gap is at all. Because without your direct intervention, your students' chances of advancement to college or actual success in life are greatly diminished. Once again, your students need your direct intervention for them to succeed, not just in life, not just in the classroom, but also in life. Your effort, your commitment is what's going to change their life forever. That's a great why. And once you have a great why, now we can work on the what. Hopefully, I've painted the value of culturally responsive teaching as a tool to combat the academic achievement gap. With that being said, recognizing that culturally responsive teaching is an effective tool to combat the academic achievement gap, it's time that we discuss some of the best practices, some of the strategies that we can establish in our classrooms to confront this issue. And how exactly can we create a culturally responsive classroom? Now, I want to be clear as I move forward, this is going to provide you a baseline. This will not provide you all possible methods. This will not open every door. This means this is to give you a brief touch of the best practices and strategies so that you can continue your research further once you recognize how important of a tool this can be. Okay, what is a culturally responsive classroom? Let's start here. A culturally responsive classroom is student-centered. It takes the values and the differences in your students and creates an environment where the students can maintain their cultural integrity while offering them the opportunity to succeed academically. You're taking, you're creating an environment that actually includes the students. Within this environment, the teacher becomes the facilitator. You're no longer just teaching, you're facilitating and offering them opportunity to have student talk, to speak out, to engage in the lesson in their own culturally diverse ways. This is not just a one size fits all method. One classroom will be one way, another classroom will be another way. Keep in mind that you will have to put in a little extra work to create this environment, but you have to be comfortable adjusting your material to meet your students' cultural needs. Sometimes your material will be dry, sometimes your material will be boring, and I'm just going to say boring, but it'll be at the very least, sometimes it could be culturally insensitive or I don't want to say neutral, but unavailable or unconnect, something that the students can't connect with. Make an effort at this point to be willing to adjust the material to meet your students' needs. Now, according to Geneva Gay, and this is from 2010, a culturally responsive teaching practices, they all should be. Now, this is important. One, validating. Culturally responsive teaching utilizes cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of references. Your goal is to additionally help validate that their cultural experiences have value, not just lip service, not just something you say or don't say, but if you want to create a culturally responsive environment, one, it should be validating. Two, it should be comprehensive. Culturally responsive teaching is about educating the whole learner, helping the students of color maintain identity and connection with their ethnic groups and community, developing a sense of community, camaraderie, shared responsibility, ethnic success, while also learning. You're wanting it to be comprehensive. Remember, you're trying to teach the whole student. You're trying to reach them completely and not just throw information at them. Number three, it should be multidimensional. Uh, Culturally responsive teaching encompasses curriculum, content, learning content, classroom climate, instructional techniques. It should be multidimensional. Don't think that there's a one size fits all technique and strategy that you're going to be able to employ. You're going to have to employ multiple methods, multiple techniques. Be prepared to make adjustments on the fly. But this means that as an instructor, as a teacher, you're going to have to try. Number four, it's empowering. Because culturally responsive teaching is by saying empowering. It enables students to be better human beings and more successful learners. You are empowering the students to be themselves, to be okay with learning. It's cool to be smart. You're not a nerd if you're learning or becoming educated. It's empowering. It's transformative. Culturally responsive teaching defies conventions of traditional education. You are transforming your environment to meet the needs of your students, and you're not trying to transform your students to meet the needs of your convenience. It is emancipating. Culturally responsive teaching releases the intellect of students of color from the constraints, manacles of mainstream canon of knowledge and ways of knowing. For me, this is my favorite. It's liberating. It is you're taking the shackles off your students by letting them be themselves, by letting them have an opportunity to let their light shine as they grow academically. Now, what I provided before were best practices, and not just best practices, but what you should expect in the learning process in creating a culturally responsive teaching environment. Because remember, our classrooms are not always going to be small. Sometimes they're going to be large. Sometimes they're going to be made up of large numbers of minorities, and other times just a few. Sometimes you'll have more students that speak foreign languages as their native tongue, and sometimes you'll have a large number or a few. Keep in mind that those strategies that you should keep in all of your efforts are not just the only strategies you should learn, but they're the ones that you should, these are just suggestions to help you carry it along. The following are recommended best practices that can assist in employing culturally, linguistically responsive curriculum to your classroom. Now, as I stated earlier, this is just a brief overview. This is a putting your toes in the water and not pushing you into the lake. These best practices that I'm sharing with you should put in your mind what you should go research for yourself. It should put in your mind, I want to read more. I want to learn more. Let me check out Bill Malone's references so that I can read even more about how to create a culturally responsive environment, because this learning gap is terrible. It is unfair to my students, and I want to make a difference. Best practice number one, validate your students' pre-existing knowledge and relevant activities. In other words, take into account what they already know. Be fair that they have a history and a lifestyle and a life that has value, if not to your experience, but definitely to theirs. They value their own lives. They value their history. They love their languages. Respect that and validate that. Validate their pre-existing learning. Practice number two, make learning contextual. In other words, take what you learn, put it into context with their lives. Don't just tell them, don't just teach a lesson. Make the lesson come alive. by making what you teach fit into the context of their life. Best practice number 3, encourage students to leverage their cultural capital. In other words, get the students to use their own lives to explain the material you're teaching. You want them to engage culturally. You want them to engage but through their own life experiences. You want them to share their lives and their culture into the educational process. Again, this education gap is not just because they're not smart, it's because sometimes the material is irrelevant to their existence. Number 4, reconsider your classroom setup. Actually make an effort. I mean, there's no one size fits all. I'm clearly not going to be able to suggest the perfect environment, but I am suggesting that you make an effort to create a classroom environment that makes sense to your classroom's needs. And number 5, build relationships. It is impossible to truly impact people that you don't know. It is impossible to get your students to trust you when you have no actual relationships with them, when they don't believe you care. When they don't believe you care, then they're only going to give a half-hearted effort into what you're teaching them. Remember, we're trying to close the academic achievement gap, which means we're going to have to incorporate their culture into the process. And it is so much easier to do when you have relationships with your students, when you like them, when you care about them, and when you know them. In conclusion, it's clear that there is an academic achievement gap. It's clear that there are whole groups of people that are being left behind academically. But it's also clear that we as educators have a responsibility to change that. If we really want to confront this academic achievement gap, it is in the end up to us to create an environment that will allow our students to not just want to pass our class, not just want to get an A or a B, but in the end want to carry on their education, want to get degrees, want to be successful in life, want to make a difference on this planet. And as I just stated, in the end, it's up to us as educators to change the narrative for our students, for their academic life, and for their life in the future. That is the end of our presentation and our workshop for today. I would like to thank you for watching, and I hope that I shared something that was both informative, educational, and useful. I hope that I taught something today that you can take into your classrooms and change the lives of your students. In addition to this video, I'll be providing this entire PowerPoint presentation, as well as you can click on the links in my references. I hope that this was a benefit, and I'm looking forward to seeing the amazing success of your students in the future.